This video is a basic tutorial on how to open up Unreal Editor version 1. Why would anybody do this? Unreal 1 is available, you can still get copies of it, and it's relatively unencumbered, and if you get a copy of Unreal version 1, Gold Edition or whatever, it comes with an editor so you can make a level. You're not supposed to make games with it, but you can make mods for games, and it's a good way to learn 3D editing skills. This is the user interface for Unreal Editor version, whatever it is. It's 1 point something most likely. And I should point out there are some free or almost free copies of this that are for Unreal 2, Unreal 3 called the UDK 3 for whatever it is this week, as well as I'm going to call it Unreal 0, which are the beta and alpha versions, one of which is complete enough that you can absolutely go ahead and edit. The screens are shown for the 3 dimensions and also a 3-dimensional world view. Up here is the top-down view. We're looking down on ourselves. That's sad. And then over here we have either a side view or a front view, and the other one's the other way around. If I turn, if you'll notice here, we're going to zoom in on this, and I'll explain how I'm doing that in a minute. This is top-down, so when we start off the level, we're usually looking, we'll call it, well, I guess east. Now over here, this is pointing the same direction. Now I'm going to look up in the little window down here, and you'll notice, that means we're looking at it from the west. Okay, now here's our other view. It's got to be front or back, so I'm going to turn to the left, and we're turning to the left. Now you might be wondering how I'm doing this, so this will be your basic introduction. First, let's use the 3D view because it's more intuitive to a human being. Welcome to the construct, Neo. So anyway, what those are grid lines that show us 0. That spot right there is the center of the map, and it's a huge cube. Now, depending on the version number of whatever version of Unreal you're using, this can be up to 7 miles across or even larger. You can scale anything any size you want to. This one defaults to being pretty freaking big, about half a mile or a mile, depending on how you're doing your scaling. Now I'm going to hit this button over here called Cube. Now the reason I'm doing that is it gives us a forced perspective, and now I can explain how I'm moving. The defaults that I see on my computer when I installed this are what I'm using mostly. Number 1, to move around, we have several options. I'm going to hold down my right mouse button, RMB, and then I'm going to move the mouse. I don't move around inside of the empty space we'll call the dead space. I move around in pirouette, meaning I'm moving on axis. That means I'm turning. If I hold down none of the buttons and move around, it just moves my cursor. If I hold down the left mouse button, it only moves me around in the altitude we're at, and it moves me around in what we'll call strafe mode, or what I like to call, I'd love to move forward, but you're making me move sideways instead of turning. When I play a video game, I prefer to have a keyboard or mouse where if I turn the mouse left to right, it rotates like this, and if I move the mouse or use the keyboard to go forward, it does this, but it doesn't require that I always do that. I also don't like strafe. And speaking of strafe, what if we hold down the right and left mouse button at the same time? 1, 2, now we move up and down and we literally strafe left and right. And forward and back is gone. So if we want to move forward and back, we have to use the left mouse button, and if we want to move around, we can do that like we're scooting around and we have to pick up our mouse and move it a lot. And if we want to just look around, we use our right mouse button. And if we want to move really easily everywhere other than going forward, we can strafe left to right, dodge, 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 or we can hovercraft up and down. Now you may have noticed this complementary function of having 2 buttons on the mouse gives us 3 functions to work with. The 4th function is not holding down any of them, which means we can move our mouse. We hold down one of the buttons, it makes us pirouette. The other mouse, it makes us slide around. And if we hold down both, it makes us go up and down and left to right by hovering, flying, or diving, that sort of thing. Now there are other functions that are buried in here, for instance, being able to rotate on axis so we're tilting our heads. I don't use them, and I honestly cannot remember how to do it. So I'm not going to bother with it. Now, what if we want to move the object? Now, this is called a brush. We can still move around, and we selected it. We can also deselect it by selecting other things, or we can hit the select nothing button here, select none. If we right-click any of these buttons, we get information on what they are. Some of these are kind of obscure, like what the hell is that? Oh, that's stretch a brush. That's for ripping and tearing at it. And if you do that, you have to select the eyeball up here, move camera, in order to deselect others. This one is zoom camera, which does something else that I never use. I'm only bringing up what I use to edit. Now, let's select our brush. Like painting a picture, we can use this to alter a three-dimensional space. But because we're not painting on a surface, what we're doing is we're altering the space in here. Depending on how the editor you're working with starts, we're either in a big solid mass like this game uses, and we're cutting holes in it, so we will make a hole, a little room like this, or it'll be an empty space and we're creating something in it. For instance, the video game Half-Life and all of the editors based on it, you add things to an empty space, and then everything else is considered the error space. In this game, this entire area here, all of this half-mile to 7-mile cube, is a dead zone, or more accurately, a zone where you die. It is a solid mass that if you fall into it, you teleport into it, and you die transporter accident style. Anyway, the cube, if we start off with a blank level, when we click it, starts at the origin, or 0 by 0 by 0 position. Yes, that's a Star Trek reference. Let's start with a sphere. Well, it's a kind of crappy looking one, but there it is. That's a cylinder, or more like a cookie. Here's a cone shape for you cone heads. Staircases, which you will need to get to know and love. Spiral staircases, which are pretty and fun and over-implemented sometimes. This kind, which is a partial spiral, it's given another name, and when you right-click it, you get build a spiral staircase, build a stair, and if I hover over that, build a curved stair. This one is for creating sheets, and it looks just like it's called. Now let's get back to the cube, and let's do our first game level edit. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a cube like that, just like that, and I can alter it by right-clicking in here and changing its size, how thick the walls are, and whether it's hollow or not. I can make it hollow like that, build, and now we have a hollow box that has all the characteristics needed to make, kind of a room. If this was an empty space, this would be how I would build my buildings. But because we're cutting into a solid mass, the reality, I'm just going to cut a hole in it. Now over here are the functions for chopping things out of space or interacting with them. This one here is called subtract brush from world. It's the second from the top right. Subtract. The default picture here is literally bubbles on cement. I'm sure it was an art piece. I'm sure a gallery loved it. Now, we're going to I'm going to undo that. Edit, undo. Oh, we've undone it. Let's move our brush. Now, if I hold down the control key, that's the default on my computer keyboard, and I use the mouse button like I'd move, instead of me moving, it'll move it forward and back. If I use the right button, it'll move it left to right. And if I hold down both the buttons while holding down the control key, I can move it up and down. And remember, if I don't touch the keyboard, if I hold down right mouse button, left mouse button, I go like that, it can make me move up and down, right, left. If I do this, it just spins me around. That's the right mouse button. If I left click, I can move me around like this, but I can't change altitude. If I select our cube, make sure it's highlighted, it has to be bright, and hold down the control key, if I left mouse button, it moves it forward and back relative to here. Remember, if I'm over here, it's going to be right to left. It moves it a certain direction on the map. If I right mouse button, it'll go the other direction, the other dimension. And if I hold them both down, up and down. Now this is called chording, like you're hitting a chord on a piano. The idea is that I can get 3 functions out of 2 buttons for moving me around my view of the world, like this, or move it around. And yes, there are other functions, so I could rotate it on an axis, but again, I never use them. I always screw up when I do it, to be honest, so I just don't bother with it. There's a rotator tool up here for your brush if you want to do that. I don't recommend doing that on the first day you're playing with this editor. So let's move our box back to the origin. Now, the other thing is that we can do, well, kind of math with them. Now, we're going to go ahead and hit our subtractor button. That makes a hole in time space. Now I'm going to grab this and I'm going to arbitrarily move it some direction. Doesn't matter which one. For sake of argument, I'm going to move it to the right. Again, I'm holding down the right mouse button, and it's moving not to my right, but to a specific direction. Now we're going to look at the overhead maps, or the side view maps and such. We zoom out by holding down the right and left mouse button and pushing away from ourselves to zoom out, and to zoom in, we pull in close to ourselves. So now that we can see if I move it ostensibly to my right, I'm really moving it south. And over here we get our other views. That one's looking at the same edge. And here we go with this one. This gets very confusing very rapidly. But there's an advantage to having all these views, and I'm going to show it to you pretty quickly. As you might imagine, there's 3 functions I can do with the mouse if I hold down the control key in here. If I just hold down the control key and grab anywhere, it'll move it around freely. Let me zoom in on that so it's a little more visible. You may not be able to see any of this, honestly. Like that. And it moves our little red square, and that's, again, our current brush. If I right mouse button it, it'll start rotating it, which means I can cut odd shapes into it. So for the hell of it, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to move it here. Just like that. Now, we're going to look at it in 3D, see what I just did. I've just made it to where it's not lined up cleanly. It may have some error on the lineup. And if I want to make another part of the room, I have to know how to do that. Now, can I just cut it again? Yes. But this wall here won't really disappear. That surface right there, that's only visible from one side, this wall, will still be there technically and mathematically. In order to make that not possible to happen, I have to get rid of it. So what I do is I do a function called either de-intersect or intersect. The brush intersects with something solid, and I hit it. It does this. Now the brush is intersected with the world, and if we look at it from the top, it's kind of a diamond shape. But it also just intersected with this empty space, and it can cut a hole. Now let me make our cube again. What if we de-intersect, not de-intersect, but what if we de-intersect? Let's say I de-intersect. Well, then it makes a piece of cube inside of a space I've already cut into. Now, what that would be useful for is I could then go up here and say another function. I could add brush. That means it would create a notch in it like that and make a weird shape. Now I'm going to go here and hit Edit, Undo, and I'm going to create our cube again. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose to intersect. That means I'm going to cut a little diamond shape into the rest of the dead space. And I'm going to subtract it. Now if I add it, all it's going to do is going to add more of what's out here already, but now it's going to have this weird texture screw up. So if you're trying to cut something in time-space, or into a space like that, you need to make sure you intersect the brush with everything so it'll cut into it. If you're trying to add a box in here, like a chair or Rubik's Cube or anything else in there, you need to hit de-intersect so that you make sure you don't chop it or add it into the dead space. Anyway, let's hit the subtract brush. And now we've made our room a little bit bigger. Now I'm going to go ahead and select the cube, and for sake of argument, I'm going to unrotate it so that it's back the way it should be and move it out of our way. I'll just put it over here. It's not part of our little level we're editing, and it's not in the way. And I'm going to select it and then deselect it a couple of times to make sure I've deselected it. Again, you can hit the select nothing button to turn off anything. The reason they added that in, if you're not aware of it, is because if you mess with this long enough, you'll eventually select 16 things at once by accident. And when you go, move something, it'll move 16 things you didn't mean to. Now I'm going to right click in here and add in a light so that we can see in the room. And I'm also going to go up here to this part here. We can pick textures, classes, sound effects, music. There are other things that can be added in, but let's take the classes. And I'm going to go to navigation point, and I'm going to look for player start. There's several of them, singular player only, or just generalized player start. Player start generic will work. We go in here, I hover near our light, I right click, and add in player start. And just like the cube, I can select left click the light, I can hit control, and I can grab the thing with both mouse buttons to raise and lower it. Now I'm going to show you one last thing. What if I need to move it up to where it's exactly lined up with the ceiling? Well, let's line up as best we can by looking at it. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key instead, and then now we move with it. Just like if I hold down the keys and I don't hold down the Shift key, and it makes me go up and down. I can drag things around in the level. Now, for sake of argument, we also have to do another stage. I hit Rebuild, Rebuild Geometry, and now you see it exactly the way it looks. That's because it defaults to showing dynamic lighting. If we switch it to textures only, it looks like it is in the editor. And that's very handy because maybe we need to change something. Now, one last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select a texture. I'm going to pick, let's try Unreal Window. I'm going to select Background. I'm going to hit here, just click the wall, right click, and apply texture background. I can also just click a wall and click a texture. Or I can click this wall and just click a different texture, a nice black surface. And for the heck of it, I'm going to do that over here, select black wall, and on this one, I'm going to do another trick. I'm going to right click it, surface properties, and tell it to be a mirror so we can see ourselves in the reflection of it. Okay, now we hit, again, options, rebuild. Every time you rebuild, you have options for making it higher or lower quality or whatever. You notice how messed up it might look here. But when we do that, it makes definite changes like lighting and everything like that. It also rebuilds the whole level. That's useful, but eventually when you get finally done with it, you might find that it won't rebuild correctly. You may have to mess with a bunch of optional settings. That'll be a whole separate video. Now we're going to play the level to demonstrate that we can get into it. It doesn't have any special features. We're just going to play level, which is Control P on the keyboard. And it does this. Sometimes it doesn't start cleanly. And now we're in the room, and this is the room we just built. Move over here, move around, and there I am. And yes, that's the default character if you're playing the game without editing and altering it. And if we back up a bit, we can observe from the third-person perspective, shooting the black wall, and, well, shooting the wall there, and that's about it. And, well, that's about it. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. And that's a very basic tutorial verbally on what keyboard controls and mouse controls are needed for editing in this game engine. Good day.